and welcome to Brain Balance Live. We are here with Heather Wells. She is just a constant support to all of us. And as we noticed today, we are wearing our blue. We must be in a blue kind of mood today. How are you, Heather?
Doing well. I got all excited thinking we were going to build snowmen in the Woodlands, Texas, and it melted as it hit the ground.
Yes, I've heard that it's melting quickly.
It is, but it was just cool to see something winter-ish falling from the sky when you don't see that very often.
Yes, for sure.
How are you?
Oh my gosh, I'm good. I'm wearing my winter wear as well because for Florida, we are actually pretty cold as well. So it's we like to keep it cold in the house and just let ourselves freeze a little bit because we don't feel it very often.
I do the same thing.
It's so crazy. But as always, we're here each week just to talk about different subjects with Heather. She is an expert in her field and in many others, I'm sure. But she is a therapist. She's a board certified cognitive specialist and also a national autism speaker. And I am so grateful for your advice every week, Heather. I have to say, we were both kind of hurriedly coming to this. There must be something in the air because we were both kind of crazy. And I was struggling with schoolwork today. So I always look at these sessions as my moment to take for myself to learn something and just get my life on a better track with my kiddos.
Well, that's what we hope for. And thank you so much for doing this with me. It's so fun.
I love it. I love it. What are we going to be talking about today, Heather?
We are talking about following directions, listening. Sometimes we get the questions, why won't my child listen? And maybe it's why can't my child listen? There are many, many, many different skills that go into listening and following directions. So I kind of want to decode that today and provide some strategies.
I need this so bad. It's like my life just holds up. Like you have a magic mirror in your house that just shows you what I need to hear about. And I'm sure everybody at home feels the same. Anybody following at home, if you have questions for Heather while we're live, please shoot them in the comments, or even if you're watching on the replay. Heather is very involved with her community and she is ready to answer some questions. So I say we dive right in. What do you say?
I'm ready to roll with that first slide.
Let's do it.
And so the first thing I want us to look at is, first of all, there's a difference between auditory processing disorder and a language processing disorder. And almost always kids get referred for auditory processing when it's in the school and there are learning challenges, especially when the kids are getting older. Auditory processing involves the ear. There is a stimulus in the outside world, a person talking, music, whatever the sound is. Can the ear take it in, detect it, and just kind of process it correctly? Like, is it garbage in? Is it distorted? Sometimes this happens if kids have had a long history of ear infections, because the middle ear is usually, the cochlea is usually where the fluid builds up. And so it's kind of like if you listen to someone talking underwater, when you're trying to learn to talk, you're going to misinterpret those signals. But it is really an acoustic phenomenon, and that's it. Sometimes it's impaired. If you have kids who you say their hearing tests are normal, but they seem to struggle when there's background noise, they can't tune out the background noise, or they don't know where sound is coming from, localizing the sound. That's something we take for granted. But I've used this analogy before, but it's the best one I can think of. When you're driving and you hear a siren, and that little moment of panic, we're like, where is it? I got to get out of the way, pull over. Imagine having that all the time. That is part of us feeling grounded and safe in our environment. Look out, Johnny. I don't know if that person's saying it from my left, my right, from behind me, or in front. So I don't know where to duck or what to look out for. And so that can put kids into a fight or flight mode.
Okay.
But sequencing sounds, the best example of this that comes to mind is dyslexia. When kids, let's say they're trying to spell the word desk, D-E-S-K, and they spell it DEX, D-E-K-S. We have 7 auditory pathways. That means the signals are arriving in the wrong order. It is not because they are visually seeing them in reverse, unless they also have a visual perception issue. But dyslexia is an auditory and language-based disorder. And sometimes the certain pitches are skewed and other pitches aren't. Like a s is a high sound. Maybe I hear those better than g, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So really, if you give your child instructions and you say, what did I just say? And they can repeat it back to you, it is not an auditory processing challenge.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
As far as that's not what's getting in the way of following directions. If they have difficulty with that, then it might be. But just keep in mind that because this is much more frequently suspected in the schools, I think, or even in parents, and for understandable reasons, I think they have an auditory processing challenge. Yes, they may, but is there anything else going on? Auditory processing, sometimes kids get diagnosed with ADHD when it's actually auditory processing, or vice versa. We have to really look carefully at this and know that a lot of tests for auditory processing are so complex that kids with a language disorder failed the auditory processing test because they couldn't follow the instructions. And that's language, not auditory processing.
Oh my gosh.
But if you know, my child cannot hear with background noise. Talk about preferential seating at school. Can they sit closer to the teacher, away from windows or doors where there are noise? Get their visual attention. Maybe they're having difficulty. Think about how much harder you have to churn to focus if you're having to strain to hear what someone is saying, like in a movie with loud background noise. If you give visual cues to go with it, they can usually process that better, and the team of the two makes them more successful. And there are devices called FM devices, or amplification devices, that tune out background noise and tune up the volume of the speaker. And you don't want them using that in a quiet setting, but it is a way to help them be more successful. So those are a few tips real quick for that. We're going to focus a little bit more on the language processing because that's much more involved in following directions and that kind of thing. So with this, we look at phonological abilities. This can be auditory or language. Can they act? Can I separate the sounds that make the word cat? If you give me those 3 letters, can I put them together into a word? If I say, for newspaper, if I say new paper, can you tell me which sound is missing? Those are examples. These are the types of skills we use to decode words. Very involved in literacy and spelling and writing.
I was going to say, yes, my sister's a first grade teacher, and a lot of what you're talking about right now, she's very into the science of reading.
Yes.
And the science-based method. A lot of this sounds very similar to what she's trying to promote in her teaching.
Yes. And part of the issue too, we're seeing this more in kids right now. One of the reasons is that I'd much rather play a video game than read Dr. Seuss books or do rhyming games. In the car, we pull out a movie. Instead of saying, I spy something that starts with A, I spy something that starts with B. Talk to your kids, play music. So many skills are learned there. But beyond the decoding and segmenting the sounds and putting them together, we really get into language. And this is where following instructions, they're all intermingled, but this is much more of a true language processing disorder. I've mentioned this before, but how specific is your kid's language? And do they say this, that, thing, over there? Or can they say, I need to put my backpack on top of this shelf and that is very, very important. We sometimes subconsciously or consciously, because we're in a hurry, fill in blanks for kids. If you did not know what they were talking about, it's an unknown subject, unknown context. Would you know what they're talking about? Would an unfamiliar listener know what your kids are talking about? This is enormous because when we go from narrative stories and, there's characters and a plot and a setting and a life lesson to textbooks, you talk about very, very academically specific language. We need it in work as well.
Yeah.
And abstract language sometimes falls apart. True story. And a mom says, don't let me see you playing with that toy anymore. And so they turn their back and keep playing with the toy, and it looks like defiance. You told me not to let you see me playing with it. Mission accomplished. And it looks like what an ornery rascal. But really, there are certain parts of these disorders that are like that. Or it's raining cats and dogs, and they're looking for the animals in the sky.
Yeah.
not understanding humor and idioms and just sort of colloquialisms, that kind of thing. The English language has more colloquialisms than any other language. And multiple meaning words. How confusing. And an example of this, and use the word pregnant in a sentence. And the boy says, the fireman came down the ladder pregnant. And the teacher said, do you know what that word means? It means with child. So the fireman came down the ladder with a child. So not being able to tease apart nuances. But yeah, there are a lot of multiple meaning words, and even which syllable you stress might change the meaning, like envelope, that I mail something in, and envelop, surround.
Yeah.
And not being able to pick up on the different stress patterns and things. But beyond that, how is their response execution? Okay, auditory signal came in. I did my thing with the language. Now, how do I respond? This is executive function. Language and executive function are so intertwined. And so can I organize the info that you told me and organize the info that I want to share back with you, my response? Can I remember what you said? Can I remember the beginning of my sentence by the time I get to the end of it? Working memory. Some kids have awesome memory in all ways, except for auditory memory. If they hear it, they can't remember it. If they see it, it sticks.
Yeah.
Are they self-regulated enough? Because if kids go into a fight or flight mode because of emotional dysregulation, sensory issues, y'all have seen the chart I've done on these other shows about the hippocampus. The information comes through the brainstem, the sensory information. Guard dog says, am I safe? Sensory input sometimes lies and says, no, you're not. Information does not even make it to some of our language processing centers, even if we are capable.
Yeah.
So sometimes we need to get our kids to do those self-regulation strategies before we can really know where they stand on language. But that is an executive function.
Yes.
Regulation and focus. Did you have my attention? Do I know which person to listen to? Can I tune out the TV and hone in on you? Did you get my eye contact? Did you call my name first? Can I sustain that focus? And again, even if a child doesn't have a profound issue with attention, if I'm having to struggle to retrieve words and think about what they mean and remember it, I can't focus as long because I went through my gas faster. It's like speeding 80 miles an hour down the highway instead of 40. You go through the gas twice as fast.
Yeah.
But this is staggering. I have a quote here from Gail Richard, PhD. She has written over 10 books on this topic. She is one of the nation and probably international leading experts in this field. She has co-authored assessment and screening instruments. She is very well renowned. She's a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. She said about 95% of academic challenges are related to issues with language processing and or executive function. And yet the kids get diagnosed with auditory processing, and what we do for these things is entirely different. If we don't know what the underlying cause of the issues are, we can hit the bullseye, but it's of the wrong target.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay.
So think about executive function, the organization, the memory, the focus, the regulation is like an orchestra. That's why I have this picture here. A lot of kids, you give them a memory task, you're like, wow, I named off 7 words and they rattled them back. Or they focused on that video game for 10 minutes, which is a different kind of focus. We won't go there. They finally learned how to use it. Can they do all of it at the same time? It's not enough to have a good drummer, to have a good guitar player, to have a good string section. Do they all play in harmony together, well balanced, a pleasing performance? That's what real life function is.
Oh, okay. All right. You're going to unpack all of this. This is very fascinating.
Yes. So we'll move on and start doing a little deeper dive here.
Okay. I'm excited. There's going to be tools.
So another way to look at this, just because this point is so important, is that the job of the schools is to teach academic content, right? When you're younger, reading, writing, spelling, math. And then it gets more advanced, social studies and science. And that's when the language gets much more complex. So that is what schools and tutors are almost always going to focus on. That is their job. But then the schools may not be completely designed sometimes. And a lot of this information you really have to specialize in to know that a lot of times kids who have learning disabilities, they are in fact underperforming in math, for example, compared to what their IQ is. So therefore they have dyscalculia or some other label for math disorder. That is most of the time a symptom, but it's treated as you struggle in math. And so this is your label. So now we're going to support you in math. Why do they struggle in math? I don't understand these abstract concepts of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, spatial concepts, because I have visual spatial issues. Why do they struggle? If we treat it as math, we're putting a Band-Aid on a symptom. Even many learning disabilities are symptoms. And what's underlying that? The core learning skills, auditory processing, visual, all of the sensory processing things you hear us talk about all the time. Visual, auditory, hands-on, tactile, body awareness, being upright and balanced, equilibrium, motor skills. I have a coordinated body. I can do motor planning. I learn how to plan cognitively. I can coordinate my thoughts. I get rhythm and timing in my motor movements. I can segment words. Being able to organize my world, have mental schemas, file cabinets of where things go and how things fit together. So that is foundational. If we don't treat that, if I don't have good body awareness, a lot of times I struggle with geometry because I don't get spatial concepts. But I have to have that basic sensory motor stuff going. And then we think what's involved in processing, the things I just said, memory, attention, processing speed. Sometimes kids' accuracy is fine, but it's delayed. And then they are, it looks as if they may have decreased intelligence. And that is so often not the case. Give them time. And I'm going to talk about what kind of adjustments to make.
That's the tricky part. I'm like, oh goodness, like how do we first of all know the difference and address it? It's so, because it sounds like it's just so many steps to figuring it out.
Well, and you have professionals on your side, but do know that a lot of schools are not going to do all this thorough executive function tests and all that. A lot of schools don't even have certain services that would involve really differentiating auditory processing and language. I know some schools don't have a speech language pathologist or don't have an OT, et cetera. But I'm driving this point home because it's so important, because there is an epidemic of shooting at the wrong target. So now we can move on and start looking at what do we do. So we talked about what to do if it's auditory processing. What can we do to increase the speaker's volume and decrease the background noise and that kind of thing? But now we're moving on.
Next slide. All right, there we go.
So one of the greatest things we can do is talk about whole body listening. This is great because it's visual. So we talked about adding visual stimuli to kids who are having difficulty with the auditory. I understand that some kids have difficulty in both of these. If I don't feel my body the way I'm supposed to, and you tell me what my hands and feet are supposed to be doing when I'm listening, I don't even feel my hands and feet the way you do. I don't have the self-awareness to know that I was humming or doing this and it was distracting other people, or I don't have the inhibition to stop it. So we can explicitly, and a lot of these kids, like we said, are much more literal than abstract. This is very literal. This is concrete for them. So when I'm told to listen, this is what it means. If we just say listen, do they know what that means? Ask your kids, what does it mean to listen? That sounds so obvious. It isn't necessarily.
I'm so excited to ask my kids that right after this. Do you know what listening means?
And see how deep they go. It may be that what they say is correct, but is it all that's involved in listening?
Right.
Because listening is not just hearing the words. It involves how we behave while someone else is talking, not formulating our own response, but actually paying attention to what they're saying, reading in between the lines. How are they feeling about this? What are they needing from me? There's so much more to it. But the brain need to think, I'm going to be curious. What is the speaker trying to tell me? Make sure they know what speaker means. You can adjust these for any age level. This is just an example. My hands are in my lap or raised if I have a question. A lot of kids are impulsive and blurt out questions and don't know to wait or to get permission. My body faces the speaker. How huge is this? they're pointing to the tummy. So if somebody's talking, I'm not indicating I'm listening if I'm doing that. I might be, but it's not the same as you got me. I'm all in.
Yeah.
What
I
are
love
my
this.
the eye contact? Look at the speaker. My ears are ready to listen. My mouth is quiet. You could even add one depending on the age level and stuff of my mouth is quiet until it's my turn. And then I respond, that kind of thing. Or I ask questions about the parts I didn't understand.
Right.
And heart, I care about what the speaker says. We don't want to overlook that. Listening is not mechanical. This seems mechanical, but we also talk about empathy and connection and really giving someone the respect of caring what they say. This is our friend or our family member, and how it makes them feel when we listen and what we're showing them. We need to talk about why. This is the why behind listening, and of course in school, so you can learn, etc. But I added some information over here about something that is not talked about enough, even though this is, in a way, it's almost the opposite of language processing disorder. Nonverbal learning disability is another one of the most overlooked challenges. They struggle with many sensory motor skills, balance, visual spatial concepts, coordination, fine motor, gross motor, organizing thoughts, prioritizing tasks. Does any of this sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Inattention, inhibition, blurting out answers, recognizing and processing nonverbal cues and the nuances of conversation and written material. Even if they have good body language, they are missing the nuances because they are very literal.
Yes.
And so when their reading comprehension can suffer, even though their vocabulary is often way above average, IQ may be way above average, but it is black and white. The paper says this, and if you ask me a question that is not explicitly stated, I think you're pulling a funny on me because that story ain't about that. Like in the Civil War, I could tell you where all the battlefields were, what all the generals' names were, but I don't know what the war was about. That would be this, along with a lot of our other kids. That happens. And this is why it gets misdiagnosed as ADHD a lot, nonverbal learning disability. But you can imagine how that translates. All of these can translate into social issues and relationship problems. And kids often cover this when they're young, but as they get into teens and college and adult, anxiety sets in, stress. I can't keep a job. I don't hold on to relationships. I'm struggling. But they're so misunderstood. It looks like they're not applying themselves because most of the time, their verbal IQ, their language ability is the opposite of what we're talking about with these other kids. It is 20 points higher than their performance, their output, how they can use what they know.
Wow.
So know about that's not the focus of today, but there's no way I could go through this without mentioning it. This kind of chart is excellent for them because they do struggle with the nuances of body language and thinking about the heart feely stuff like the empathy and so forth.
Yes, we have to actively think about the empathy in this house. For me, I'm an empath. I feel everything that happens in this house. Nobody needs to teach me how to do it. My Roger, he just doesn't notice sometimes how someone else is feeling. He also moves on very quickly after something is done where I'm like reeling and he's just over it very quickly. I could see, I always tell him like, I want you to have strong relationships, and it does worry me.
Yes. We need to teach kids. Sometimes we have to teach them sort of the rules of engagement when they don't, as we continue to grow the social emotional skills, but understand that just because we must do that, just because a child can recite back, when I do something that hurts someone, so I say, I'm sorry. We don't ever force apologies. I did a whole other show on that, but we give rules of engagement, but that doesn't mean that it actually connects with the inner depths of who they are. That won't happen without the executive function skills being where they need to be, without all of this social emotional abilities.
Yep.
I can memorize that face means somebody's sad, and then I think that they get it, but they don't. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, very often I feel like, at least with him, he turns any situation around and suddenly he's the one who's hurt. And I'm like,
yeah. And this is not about heart. This is not about a hard heart. I want to just make sure that's clear. I say this a lot on shows, but anytime we're talking about this, I have to say this has nothing to do with a human being's heart when they're struggling with these issues. A lot of times it is a cognitive thing that I don't have the theory of mind to be able to put myself into your shoes and to really consider how what I did impacted you you know, and so it's a cognitive inflexibility thing.
Yeah.
And so we've got to do things to get that communication going
Yeah.
in all the parts of the brain. Okay, let's move on.
I love this little guy too. I'm going to take that with me.
Yes. I think it's that one because his hair and his outfit go with my slides.
Yes.
But again, being explicit, and this works for older students. I mean, they need concrete. There are 6 steps of listening. I mean, we could come up with more, but this is well enough. We don't assume that they know what anything means. I mean, but the things I told y'all earlier, hearing, we hear when our ears pick up sound. We must pay attention. We organize the information with all the information that's already there. So this is a concept of using my background knowledge and working memory. Somebody tells me something and they want my opinion, and I can think, I had a conversation with my parents about this a couple weeks ago, and that is relevant, and I can pull that in to help him. Can I organize that information? Can I remember what's there and use it and come up with something useful as a response?
Yes.
Understanding what they're saying, remembering, and responding, asking questions, making comments, using the information proves we understand it. So those are the steps. We need to rehearse those with them. Okay. You can even use that chart on the previous page without it all filled in and have them write in what the different parts are for and add the why to it once they know that part. We keep our hands and our feet still so that the other person knows we care what they're saying and we don't distract other people, that kind of thing. Another great thing, y'all have seen this kind of scale I've used before for self-regulation of emotions, and I'm escalating, and so now I need to use a calming strategy. Have kids do that on how well am I paying attention? Where is my attention right now? How much attention do I need to pay to this? These are the instructions for the exam. That would be a 5, And a commercial on TV, 0, 1. Have them start rating things like that so that they understand the important stuff that they need to tune into. And how do you raise it? What's on your mind? Do you have feelings that are getting in the way? Is your mind stuck on what you're going to do later? What's your posture? When you sit up straight, send signals to the brain to focus and process and learn. Deep breathing, a lot of the self-regulation stuff, facing the speaker. So you can see how this is some of the same information on the previous slide, but I'm showing you how to adjust it for older kids.
Yeah, I love it. I love
have
that.
them rate it. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now that we have them ready for listening and they've rated where their attention is and how much attention they need to pay, how do we defeat those distractions? First of all, we have to identify what they are. So you can do this even if they're telling you a story from school and they missed what the teacher said, or you can pull out hypotheticals. Like, Jamie went to his sister's play and the child behind him had a cold and kept coughing. And he had a sore throat and he didn't feel very good. You kind of give an example scenario. What were the distractors for him on paying attention to the play? So you can kind of have dress rehearsals like that. And of course, always pull in real things from life. If you had trouble focusing on something at work, go through it with them out loud. They need to know you're a person. You don't have to be perfect. And they learn from you and it makes them open up to you. But is there anything about the room that's making it hard for me to listen? Yeah, I'm really hot. Could I turn on a fan? I'm cold. Can I put on a jacket? I mean, am I hungry? Get a snack. What do I see or hear that is keeping me from listening? That tells me I need to orient myself differently, maybe. Talk about rearranging my study space. Is there anything about the way I'm feeling that's making it difficult to listen? Of course, that can be physically or emotionally. So once I've identified those things, can I get rid of the distraction? Mom, can you take care of the toddler? I'm trying to do my homework. That might take care of that distraction not for mom, but for
easier said than done.
No, that's just an example. But can you get rid of it? If you can't, are you able to ignore it? Yes or no? Make whatever changes you can. I gave examples already. How can I relate the topic to something I've experienced? This increases attention because it makes it relevant to me. How many times do I talk about getting kids engaged and why does it matter? How is it relevant to my life? A lot of times kids cannot connect those dots. So if you find out what they're studying, give them cues. You find out they're studying something about the solar system. You remember when we watched the movie Space Camp, whatever it is, or we watched that documentary and start connecting dots. Oh yeah, now I'm more interested. And when I'm interested in something, I don't churn as hard, that kind of thing. So all right, let's go on.
I love this. Okay. I'm ready to ask all the questions.
And and so those are about listening, as far as being quiet, listening, and getting rid of distractions. Now, the next step is we want to teach active listening. You may not want to start with this if you have an interrupter. We need to work on inhibition first. But this is an important skill for everyone. Why do we actively listen? Do you know why we actively listen and get the kids' answers? And the purpose of active listening is to make sure we understand and to show how much we care about what the person is saying. You talk about why you do it. And there are two main ways to do that: give feedback or ask questions. Okay. And then you can see down here some examples of nonverbal and verbal feedback. A lot of it's just the smiling, the nodding, the body orientation, the eye contact. And really, be sincere. Make sure, did you say but comment on what they're saying. That is amazing. Congratulations. That's active listening without interrupting, and make sure they know the difference. That is an overt conversation to have. Leaning forward means I'm really into what you're saying, right? And see, here are the tips for asking questions. Wait until the speaker is finished. Ask questions related to the topic, not them telling you about this big science fair project they did. And you're like, did you know that I had 3 Big Macs last night? Not related. That's a question, but it needs to be related to the topic. And keep in mind, literal, you just said ask a question. What's your favorite state? Why? If there are words you don't understand, ask what they mean. And talk it. Sometimes kids will be embarrassed about this. We always want to be working on vocabulary, but we all have words we don't know. You know what word I learned the other day?
What?
No, I was just sorry.
I thought you were going to tell me.
I don't know. If I could think of one right now, I do learn words all the time, but it's just failing me right now, girl. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I totally get it.
Apparently I didn't learn it very well. If you missed information, could you repeat that? I missed what you said right there. And then thank the speaker for answering your question. These are active listening. Give feedback, ask questions, and then specific ways to do it. But talk about why of active listening. Okay.
I have never thought about that. That's so great. Are we moving to the next slide now?
We are.
While we move to the next slide, I was just going to say, these are great tips because Roger interrupts quite a lot. And it's easy to just be like, I'm talking, you need to stop. Giving these tips about how to ask these questions and keep them engaged in the conversation is so, so smart. I love it.
Yeah. No, it makes it make sense to them on all of these. Talk about the why of it. Y'all hear me say that on every topic. But I love this idea too. Another way to work on following instructions is drawing activities. Like this picture on the left. I mean, there could be directions about draw a tree, draw a rake to the right side of the tree, draw a cat on the other side of the tree, draw leaves between the boy and the cat. What are those? Those are spatial concepts. Pay attention to what kinds of instructions your kids have difficulty following. Sometimes it's because they don't know over, next to, underneath, between, on top of. They don't know what those words mean. Do they have body awareness issues? Do they struggle in math? They may have trouble with spatial concepts. Sometimes it's first do this, last do this. Sometimes we say before you do this, do this. So the things you're telling them to do, the words are coming out in the reverse order of how you want them to do them. They may not be able to decode that. That's harder with a language deficit. You can work on if you're working on colors or numbers, draw 7 green apples, 4 red apples. You can make it very applicable to whatever you're working on academically, and they're following directions. Draw a star next to your name. Write a sentence or two about the picture you drew. So those are just examples, and it's fun, and the fine motor is self-regulating. You're getting some literacy in there and working on phonemic awareness also. Word ladders have a ton of research. This is a word ladder on the right. And so food that comes from animals, rearrange team, just rearrange those letters. Team becomes meat. There are clues on the right side, but I just did this as an example. So from tame, to get or bring something, change one letter, take. So you are playing with phonological awareness. This can help with spelling. And the more fluent I am at decoding words coming orally or in the written modality, the more my comprehension goes up, the more my memory improves, because it doesn't take as long. It's more automated, and I don't have to use up my mental sketchpad of memory
to
hold on to stuff as I struggle through sentences or orally or in writing. Match the beat. You drum beats, they drum them back. You make a sound and have them pick which toy made it. Go on listening walks. What is that sound? Where is it coming from? Remember the localizing sound. What's in the bag? You can give clues, because vocabulary is a huge issue here, especially for those kids who, I don't know, over there, it, that, the thing, stuff. Give specific clues and have them guess what's in the bag. And then maybe you can even shake it to see what noise it makes. Have them give you clues about something they hide in the bag. They are having to attach all kinds of attributes to a word, and they start seeing how things go together. Again, work on abstract language, riddles, idioms, all the figures of speech. If you are going to work on It's Raining Like Cats and Dogs, do not show them a card of cats and dogs. Even though that would be funny, it reinforces the literal interpretation. That's a really common mistake that I've seen made over the decades. So you can have one of the day, and let's all guess what this means. And there's no shaming, obviously. Yeah, that is what it sounds like, isn't it? But what it, anyway, and then you talk about what it really means.
Yeah. I love that. I wonder how long so many of us probably believed that It's Raining Cats and Dogs actually literally meant that until we realized, like, oh, right.
When I was little, I would ask my dad a question, a yes/no question. He would say, "Does a monkey have a tail?" And I'm like, what on earth does that have to do with my question? And I just knew that when he said that, the answer was yes, but I didn't know why it was yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
But I also was blind, so I think that played in a little bit with my life experience. We talked about what's the missing letter, like newspaper. Pounce on the word for little ones. Like you could have cards or toys, and you say a letter, and they pounce on the picture of the lamp or the bee. They pounce on their stuffed animal bear, and they're getting some motor activity. It's fun, but it's helping them understand the sounds and language. These are just examples. There are so many. I could do a whole day on this. Okay.
I love it.
Wrapping up here. We got one more thing I want to show y'all that has a lot to do with just saying the child's name before you give them instructions. If they're watching TV or just distracted with anything and you tell them to do instructions, if you didn't have their attention, especially if they have delayed process, they need a minute. Make sure they're looking at you. You could even have 3, 2, 1. You can do a countdown. You can do anything that becomes the signal in your house that it's time to listen. Give me 5. And that means eyes, ears, quiet, face me, quiet hands, feet, whatever. You can come up with any little thing that is the signal in the house. It's time to listen. Make sure if they're short, younger, get at their eye level. Make sure you have eye contact. This improves attention. We talked about reducing distractions. If they're having difficulty processing, talk a little slower and try not to use super complex sentences. We don't do baby talk. We don't do telegraphic speech, but we need to break it down. And what I recommend when you give instructions is instead of having them repeat it first time, yes, have them repeat it back to you verbatim and see how they do. And even if they can't do it, it doesn't mean it's auditory processing. It could be that they don't remember it or weren't paying attention. But if they can do that, that's not causing auditory processing is not the following directions issue. But in general, it is better. If I repeat back what you say, it doesn't mean I understand it. Tell me back in your own words what I asked you to do. Then you can test for comprehension.
Yeah.
And that's a language thing if there are breakdowns there. Okay. Sometimes it's a proximity issue. Sometimes you need to be closer because the further you are from the child, the more extraneous noise is interfering. But in school and at home, smart use of technology. A lot of kids think about the decoding words, coming up with the language output. A lot of kids who have these issues also have dyslexia or similar issues. Live scribe, where I can say my paper and it writes it for me. Recording lessons, getting permission from teachers to do that. Organization apps. I did a whole show on organization. If kids have delayed processing, they are working 10 times harder than everyone else, even though it's like it can look like they're procrastinating. We've done a procrastination show. Sometimes it's not procrastination. That's how long it takes me to process it. And it doesn't seem like that's true because they're so smart. Yes, they're smart. They process differently.
Yeah.
And patience is important. And having the more you can create efficiency through your routines and knowing where things are based on our organization show. It asks the teacher, this can be part of IEP, 504 plans. It can also be at home. And you're going to need a response from the child. Give them a heads up so they can plan ahead. Actually, adults, you can do this in the workplace and ask your employer, we're going to have a meeting. Could you give me a heads up about what you're going to want me to talk about? And then you can kind of find your words and retrieve them and not get embarrassed in front of everyone else. Can my student give written rather than verbal responses so that you can see what they know? Ample time to complete. One of the best accommodations is extra time to complete homework or exams. Is there a max homework limit we can put on this work, regardless of how much is done, instead of having to do the whole thing? Chunking things down into smaller tasks instead of giving them a 4-step direction. Pay attention. Is it directional words? Is it numeric concepts? What's getting in the way? If they have a big project to do, if they can see like one from a previous student, they see what the finished product is. Now they're a detailed person. Now they have a big picture to put the details into, and teach them organization and prioritizing and note-taking strategies that I've talked about before. Graphic organizers, 2 columns of notes, main ideas and details. There's highlighting all the generals, highlighting all the dates in a different color, that kind of thing. A lot of kids, especially in college, they think, oh, I've got the outline from the professor. We now have all these online classrooms and stuff. So I just need to glance at the teacher's notes. Those are the teacher's notes. They still need to take their own. Get them to write their own outline in their own words. Create a slide presentation if they're creative of the material. They need to be actively engaged to actually comprehend the information. Teach them to self-advocate. Okay, I guess that's a lot. I could keep going, but we've been going for too long.
It's never too long with you. I always enjoy our chat so much. You can see the different brain balance centers there and how we doing at the Woodlands.
There have been a couple of hiccups, but I'm hoping for next week.
Yay!
Yeah. And we're just so close. There's just some contractor things, but those are getting ironed out. Like things are coming together now really quickly.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, as always, for just basically giving us so much knowledge from your brain. I am so appreciative. Thank you for being here with us.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to everyone out there who shared your time with us. I will be back Thursday at 3:30 with Dr. Brian. Message or comment with any questions. We're happy to answer those.
Yes, we love it. Okay, great. We will see you next week. There's actually a new time for us. So make sure you come back same time next week on Monday. I'll see you then, Heather.
See you then, Jen. Thanks.